Excited to have you both on this episode of the Appregator Shopify App podcast. So for everyone who hasn't interacted with Ben and Conor yet, they are the founders of an app called ShipScout that recently joined the Appregator family, and we're super excited to have them on this podcast and learn more about their journey so far. So guys, welcome to the podcast. Excited to have you here.
Thanks for having us.
So yeah, maybe, just to quickly get started, if you want to talk a little bit about what led you into the Shopify app ecosystem, introduce yourselves a bit so that everyone gets to know you a little better.
Yeah, I can kick that off. So I was introduced into the Shopify app space from the side of being a merchant. So I work with a wonderful team of people, and we run a online sports nutrition marketplace called The Feed. And that's been growing pretty steadily for the past 5 years or so. So that was when I first got introduced into Shopify. And that's when I also first was introduced into the struggles of being a Shopify merchant, and how you're always looking for ways to optimize your customer journey. You're looking for any help and guidance you can get on best practices. And one question that we always struggled with was, you see other stores out there offering free shipping, and we wanted to do the same because we understood the basic premise that if you offer free shipping at a certain threshold, you'll inspire customers to try to reach that threshold. So we understood the value of it. We didn't quite know where to set our free shipping threshold, and that's what launched the question that turned into ShipScout of what should a free shipping threshold really be.
Yeah, just quick introduction. I'm Conor. I'm a backend software engineer, and Ben sort of recruited me to help build the back end of ShipScout, and he did the front end. It's the short version.
Nice, very interesting. I think one thing that particularly rings true in the Shopify app ecosystem is that a lot of folks don't really go out looking for the problems, but experience it firsthand, whether as a merchant or whether building websites or building Shopify sites for someone else, and then sort of building it out, and you see that sort of resonate, sort of across the ecosystem. Just on this point, I know, Ben, you spoke about this slightly, but if you could go into a little more detail about both how you sort of picked this idea. I know you said that it sort of came off your work at The Feed, but just generally after that, how did the process go? Did you think about, speaking with other merchants? Did you just build it out for internal use and then expand it? What was that process sort of like?
So the process was that we picked a random threshold, like most merchants do, but we were not confident that that was the best threshold to offer free shipping at. So then what we did is we built a bunch of internal tools. And by internal tools, I mean like spreadsheets. So very painful data aggregation and analysis. And we ran a test where we did actually test the free shipping threshold. And it was a struggle though to test it, to implement that test, and then also to run the numbers and find out what impact that had on average order value, conversion rate, all that. So that's what really inspired this, was that we saw the results and they were meaningful. So we'd run, a handful of other tests that were easier to run, more standard split tests just on our store, on our product pages, on our collection pages. And the one test that really moved the needle, had a big impact, was this free shipping threshold test. So we kind of learned what we needed to learn at The Feed, and we adjusted our threshold because of that. But then I was left with this feeling of like, oh wow, that was a powerful test, and I would never want to run it again because it was so painful to run it. But perhaps there's a way to build an app to make this easy so that other merchants can do the same test we did, and that we could continue to run tests as well on this app.
Nice. That's interesting. I think Yeah, curious to hear a little bit more about that decision in terms of like building it out for other merchants, and what were some of the challenges you faced in getting started. I'm still relatively new to the app ecosystem, but from what I've seen and read and heard, seems like the guidance and the sort of resources available today makes it much easier to potentially start an app than from a couple of years ago.
Yeah, we had no problems. It was a piece of cake, right, Conor?
No challenges whatsoever. No, I think, like Ben was saying, a lot of merchants were kind of stuck in this place where there was no go-to place to determine these rates. And anything in the Shopify App Store, if you see a gap like that where it can be useful for potentially every store and it doesn't exist, I think that's an opportunity. And in this case, ShipScout ended up filling that niche.
Nice. And just in terms of, trying to reach merchants, I think obviously the Shopify App Store is a great tool for discovery, but were you trying to send it to folks? Did you do anything in terms of like initial marketing? How did you think through some of those early challenges?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest factors that I think puts people off from launching an app, is that fear of like, I think I know it's a problem, I think I'm solving it, but like, who really cares? Who's going to come use it? Um, so I think that's why we'd been talking about doing this app for like 6 months. And I was pretty convinced like it was a problem and that it was useful for me, but you never really know until you try to launch it. And that was something we found as well. I think that if you launch an app that costs, $5, $10 a month, so it's really cheap, it's hard to go around messaging people and really taking that care of trying to like sell your app, onboard people one by one, because you're not charging enough to make that worth it. So in that case, I think you really are putting a lot of hopes on like, that either you've got some way to market it or that you really hope the App Store discovery really works for you. For us, back then we were actually, we were on the higher end. I think we were like $79, $100 a month, which when you compare this to a lot of other apps, is more expensive. But we're also solving a more difficult problem than some of them. So I think the success you have and the ability to charge for an app is sort of balanced with how big of a problem and how valuable of a problem are you solving. So for us, we had some good success on on LinkedIn, just like posting, hey, we're thinking about launching this app. We got a bunch of comments, some likes, and then we just manually like followed up with every single person and said, hey, we saw that you showed interest. Here's the beta. Come try it out. Same on Twitter. So that was, I think we had, I don't know, Conor, would you say, I don't think we had much discovery through the App Store when we launched.
I think that's right. I think the beta users was really the key with the early product, giving it away for free in exchange for feedback, and then seeing that people actually
not to be confused with us paying for reviews by giving it away for free.
That's right.
We did not do that.
But getting that feedback from early customers who we noticed actually used the app. I mean, you could give away apps all day, but if no one uses it, then that's kind of a sign, and they actually did. So that was a good sign for us.
I remember when we first launched, we had a Slack notification come in that would say, so-and-so store installed the app or pick the paid plan. And I think it was very exciting when we had the first few ones come in. But it's funny, the difference of like going from, like $0 to $100 in MRR is like 10 times more exciting than going from like 1,000 to 2,000, just because it's like magic happening because you don't know if it's going to happen. And I remember looking at those stores coming in, and I think of like the first 10, we pretty much knew, we're like, oh, that's so-and-so who knew the guy that commented on LinkedIn. So we could like track how they found us.
That makes a lot of sense. I think still very relatable on the Slack notifications. I think each one is as exciting. That doesn't ever get boring.
I remember we had the same thing on at the feed. We had that we get a like SMS on every order, and that was a threshold of success when it got to the point where I was like, this is so annoying. My phone is blowing up all the time. I got to turn it off. So it's a good sign, I think.
Yeah, that's funny. That reminds me, when I worked in D2C at this brand in India, I sort of joined when the brand was already at close to $1,200 a day. But my my boss, the CEO, had a sort of similar story. He's like, when we hit 50 orders a day, when we hit 100 orders a day, we would like have a cake come in each time. And he was like, suddenly,
Yeah.
like every few days, we had a cake coming in, and we had to then be like, okay, now it's like only the bigger milestones. But that's obviously much worse problems to have than that, for sure.
Yeah.
Um, Actually, that sort of ties in well to my next question. In terms of how you've sort of seen the Shopify app ecosystem evolve since then, I know Ben, especially you've seen this from both sides as a merchant and from the like as a Shopify partner, app developer. And I think, there have been a lot of changes on both ends, but especially in terms of, how for partners or for app developers, the amount of resources or guidance or support, the conferences, I know this wasn't always the case. But just curious to see how that sort of evolved according to you. What are some of the things that have potentially made it easier or more difficult, or how you sort of think through that?
I mean, I think the development of an app has gotten easier. I think finding success with an app has probably gotten harder just because there is more competition. I think it did used to be that you could just kind of go browse the app store and not even being a merchant yourself, you could say, oh, I have an idea for an app. I don't see it here. Let me go build it. And you might have some success with it. I think now, and I'm a little biased because this is the journey I took, but I think the path now that I think is most likely to have success is that either you work very closely with merchants or that you are a merchant yourself and you really understand like what is the big problem that someone's trying to solve and why is it so hard to solve it. Because if it's a problem that like you know someone's theme developers can go implement in half a day, that might be an okay app, but it's likely not that defensible. It's likely open to more competition, and you probably can't charge that much because you're not solving a problem that is otherwise insurmountable. So I think it's changed in that way, that the problems that apps need to solve to be successful, I think, have gotten harder. But there are better tools now for sure. I know when we started, it was, yeah, you're pretty deep in the documentation, kind of reading, especially like app authentication, all that stuff. There weren't many. I actually don't even know if there was a like starter template. I don't think there was. I don't think there was like a repo that we used to base all our starting framework on.
I would just add that we were able to find the niche, and just as the app store has gotten more crowded, more and more apps, those niches are fewer and further between. I think they're still there, but it's harder to find one.
Yeah. And like I will say that once you launch your app, the motivation to like fix problems and add new features does increase. And especially if you see like something's wrong on your app or someone's complaining about it, like right away you want to go fix that. So I think that that was the thing I noticed. The difference between like planning the app and then after we launched it is we were sort of we were answering to all the feedback right away because we felt it was really important.
Nice. So just in terms of that, in terms of how it's evolved, and your point on might be easier to launch an app, but far more difficult to sort of grow it and get it in the hands of merchants, something I've been hearing a lot and also experiencing. But just in that in terms of that, I think from when you started, how did you think about differentiating from the competition? And then as you sort of saw potentially more apps come into the same space or similar spaces, did you think about changing anything? Did you, change either from tech perspective or customer support or, anything, how you sort of thought about that?
I think one main area is we wanted ShipScout to be as self-serve as possible. And for a solution like this, where you're split testing shipping rates, that's going relatively deep into your Shopify store in a few areas. And it's not necessarily an easy thing to make self-serve, especially as you come across different store themes and different configurations that people have. And so crossing some of those hurdles was really valuable, I think, just to make it the vast majority of tests at this point you could do self-serve, I would say, on most stores. And that allowed us to sort of pick up more merchants and allow more tests to be run sooner versus kind of the less scalable option of doing a custom configuration for each and every test.
Yeah, and I mean the truth is when we launched, there's no competition. There was no other app that did this. I'd say the closest competition was probably running a test like this, where you were just testing the conversion rate of the messaging, and that different threshold wasn't actually surfaced at checkout. So you sort of missing the key ingredient of that test, of that funnel, is the last critical part where the customer either commits or goes away. So I know some stores were using Google Optimize or something to just split test the messaging of the free shipping to see what that did. But that wasn't super effective. So I think, yeah, I mean, the truth, yeah, we didn't make a plan, or we didn't make some competitive differentiator list. It was like Connor and I, we know each other before this. We've been friends for years. So it was very much like we'd be out getting drinks or something, and we'd be like, hey, we should probably go build that app now. What do you think? And I think we even have like a napkin or an envelope or something. We were out eating and we sketched out the database. We thought the schema. So it was, I think the idea of the app was probably just well tested because of my experience knowing there was a need for it. But beyond that, we didn't really do much. I guess that goes back to just the advice of just go build it, and then you'll find out if anyone's interested in it. You won't really know until then.
I do think that an app like this, if executed poorly, could lose you credibility probably relatively quickly, which is to say ShipScout becomes a shipping rate provider. And so we do a lot of work of messaging up front that if you disable all your other rates and then your customers don't qualify for the ShipScout rate based on, for instance, the zone that you configure, your customers could reach the checkout step and not receive a rate. Or if ShipScout is your only rate provider and ShipScout goes down, your customers could not receive a rate and be unable to check out. And so that kind of tied into some architectural decisions that we made in terms of making sure that the rates endpoint is very resilient and very scalable, so that it can withstand events like flash sales, when a store might be sending thousands of customers through at the same time. We want to be able to handle that no problem. And so making some of those decisions up front, I think, really benefited us as well from a technological standpoint.
Yeah, you don't want to, what's the expression of trying to change the wheels while the car's in motion, or I don't know what that is, but it's something like that, where it's you don't want to be reworking your entire architecture while things are moving. So Connor did a lot of deep thinking and good work before we launched to make sure that it was all built in a way that would scale really well.
Guys, that's super interesting. And yeah, I would love to see the little napkin or envelope with all the initial things of ShipScout. So that's a lot more valuable.
We'll have to make sure it doesn't expose any proprietary
Yeah.
info or security issues.
Yeah, it might be a good time to sort of lock that up somewhere and never see it again. But just getting to that. So all of this sounds great, and of course I'm a little biased over here, but just curious to know a little bit more about the mindset in terms of why did you decide to sell ShipScout after all of this?
I guess my answer to that is like, why did we decide to build it? And I think Connor and I decided to build it really for fun. I think we talked about it a lot. We wanted a project. I think this was right when COVID started, so it sort of felt like there was less to do in the world. So it started for fun, and it started for the thrill of building something. And if you've built anything, you know that that's really fun. But what's even more fun is when people come and use it and say they love it. It's very encouraging. So that's why we started it. And then we saw it through the building phase, through a decent growth phase, and then to a point where it got big enough that it felt like we were responsible for something that was kind of larger than the little project we started the year before. And I guess I felt like there was a responsibility to take care of it in a way that needed more dedication. And neither of us were in a place where this was something that we could jump on full time and really, really run with. So it felt like it just came to this point where it was either like there's sort of two paths. One was like, give this the attention it deserves, or find someone that can give it the attention it deserves and keep it growing. Is that fair, Connor? Does that sound accurate?
Yeah, definitely. I think from my perspective, we're both builders. We like to build the thing, and we built the thing, and the thing found product market fit, which was just a great experience in general. And from that point, I think it becomes more about scaling it and marketing it more. And I don't know about Ben, but marketing is not my area of expertise. And I think at this point, it's just that natural progression.
Yeah.
Got it. I think one more, again, slightly biased question. Apart from the fact that Mark and I are just incredible people to work with, why,
yes.
how did you no, I'm joking, but how did you, sort of think through who to sell this to? Obviously, both of you have spent a lot of time thinking through this product, taking care of this product, like building it out. And, one thing that like anyone we speak to who has an app, or, I felt that I used to run an agency that I found it, still feel the same way about it. It's something that you've put in a lot of time, work, energy into, and regardless of what sort of, whether you're involved or not, you still want to see it like grow and do well and sort of exist more than anything else. So just curious, like how did you sort of think through like who you want to sell it to, or even just in terms of like what were you sort of hoping for?
I think the top priority was just making sure it's in good hands. Just someone who we think we can trust and see it. Like I'll always be keeping track of ShipScout and what it's doing, who's talking about it. We're all on Twitter, probably more than we need to be, but just tracking these things, watching where it goes from here. And I think Appregator has the resources to make that a good path forward.
Yeah. So we found you guys through MicroAcquire. That was the original introduction, came through there. And I think having gone through that process on MicroAcquire now, I think one of the most challenging things is that if you're selling an app or doing something so big like this, you're basically doing it with someone that you don't know anything about, that you've just met the week before, and it's a huge decision. And it's just unnatural to make decisions like that in life that are that big without actually knowing the person on the other side of it. And you can't really get to know someone in a week or in a few emails and a few Zoom calls. So that I think that's, I don't know what the answer to that is, but that's really challenging, I think. And I think good relationships and trust are formed not by just things going swimmingly, but if you have a bit of a struggle and you kind of come through it and you realize, oh, we are compatible, we work well together. So the I guess all that is to say is that we met you guys through Microacquire. Then I think this was 6 months or so actually before we sort of picked up conversations again with you guys. So we'd listed on Microacquire, which sort of, the way it works there is you get a bunch of like bids and offers, and you can sort of choose to pursue one or the other. And like I said, there wasn't really any like relationship to go on there with anyone. So we sort of explored a few of those options, and what happened in the end is that we actually nothing went through. There was no sale, and in the meantime, the app had actually been growing in a pretty good way. So we were okay with it. But a few months after that, I touched base with Mark again, and throughout this whole process, I think he'd been really just easy to work with. And I think that was where that trust was just kind of building, and we ended up having like a relationship with you guys that did span several months, so that when this finally did go through, I think there was a little bit of there's a good foundation there. So I don't know if that's the most common journey we took with this, but it's the one that felt right for us, and I'm happy with it taking a little longer to make that happen.
Also, early on in those conversations, Mark was in Colorado, but he went out of his way to make his way up to Boulder, where we were.
Oh, that's right.
And we were able to grab a meal with Mark and kind of get to know him in person, which was definitely, as far as building that relationship, definitely a plus side.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate that. And yeah, I think even from our perspective, when we think about, working with folks, having the app sort of join the Appregator family, it's also not only important, like, hey, the app's doing really well, or, everyone wants to use it, or we think it's critical, but also, what is the sort of brand that's been built around the app? How's it been managed? What do customers think of it? What do other folks in the ecosystem think of it? And just, regardless of whether we are working with the founders afterwards, not working with them, it's just really important for us to get to know the founders of the app too. I think both Mark and I really have enjoyed getting to know you both through this process. And, just generally, one thing we've noticed about the Shopify app ecosystem is just how helpful, like, everyone's been. We've, I think when we were getting started with building Appregator, we didn't know much. I mean, I'd used a lot of Shopify apps before, whether while building websites for clients or while doing D2C stuff myself. And I'd used a lot of these apps before, but I'd never really dug too deep into the ecosystem. And, we've just been very, very almost sort of blown away by how helpful and kind everyone's been. And it's been a great sort of ecosystem. And when people ask us about it, that's one thing we definitely like mention, that like, regardless of what you do in the space, like, no one's out there to sort of like destroy you. Everyone's sort of lifting each other up. And like, I think that's a huge reason as to why the ecosystem has grown quicker than most others have, specifically on Shopify. Setting aside some of those biased questions, just before we wrap up, a lot of the folks I know who listen to the podcast and just generally who we speak to are now trying to get involved in the Shopify app ecosystem, or like pretty early in their journeys. Just wondering, like, how do you sort of see the next few years for the ecosystem? I think just not even just Shopify apps, but like D2C in general. A lot of hype during COVID, a lot of sort of doom and gloom right now. I think most people in the space know that, okay, nothing really has changed too much. It's just what it has been, and sort of a more natural progression. But sort of, Yeah, curious. What are you most excited for like D2C, Shopify apps, the ecosystem in general over the next few years? And just in line with that, I guess almost as sort of like a conclusion, what advice do you have for someone starting out in the Shopify app ecosystem right now?
Connor,
Well,
share your wisdom.
my first thought was just when it's doom and gloom is usually a good time to build, and I think there's a lot of opportunity still. And so if you're someone who can, hack together an MVP and go find those beta users, I think that's still a total possibility, and there's more resources than ever. And yeah, I think it's worth a shot.
Yeah, my advice would be, make sure you're having fun doing it. Build it with someone. Like, we were lucky that we enjoyed. I think at least I had a good time. I hope Connor did. But yeah, it's got to be fun. It's got to be enjoyable, especially, a Shopify app is very much something you can start on the side. So it's totally like we did it, nights and weekends, and there's a bit of time investment up front, but then just you're kind of maintaining it. It's not that big of a time sink. So I'd say just, yeah, have fun, find someone you really want to do it with. You could build it alone. I know there's some great solo devs out there doing that, but the nice thing too is, like, we did some trips, and we did some corporate retreats with the two of us. It was just a good time. We had fun along the way. I think that regardless of like the COVID bump, which is now becoming a little unclear if that really was a bump or a bump and now a return to the trend line before. I think that, ecom's a great place to be in. It's definitely not going to decline. I think when you're trying to decide what kind of app to build, if it's a super hard problem, like, that's probably the direction to go in, because it'll be more defensible. You can charge more for it, and probably you'll be providing more value. And if you can just, smash your head against the wall and figure it out when no one else has been willing to, and build an app that's really solving a tough problem, I think that's where I would start. Any app where you can, you can measure and show the return, like the actual dollars that your app is providing to a merchant, I think is, you've kind of got a bit of a leg up on other apps. So whether that's like, in ShipScout, where you increase your revenue profit or your revenue per visitor by 5%, like that's a really valuable number, or that's a really valuable, knowledge. And same with these apps that are, providing like upsells or anything like that, where you can really show your value you're adding in real numbers. I think that's really good. That space has got very competitive though, the kind of sidecar, post-purchase upsell, all of that. But yeah, I think it's still a fairly big blue ocean out there. So I think there's lots of opportunities.
No, I completely agree, and so that's some great advice. Thank you guys so much for being on the podcast. This was very fun. One of my favorite episodes I think that I've done. Really appreciate you guys both being so candid and honest about the entire journey. And yeah, excited for everyone to watch this.
Awesome.
Thank
you.